I'm Dr. Jason Bechta, and this is Out of the Basement, a podcast exploring radiation medicine and things that don't generate grant funding or tenure. I'm board certified in radiation oncology and have a PhD in molecular radiobiology. And though I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor, and none of this content should be considered medical advice. All right, on today's episode, we have a three-parter. Well, it was meant to be one-parter, but yet again, Matt and I set out to have a quote-unquote brief conversation, which we have not actually mastered by any stretch of the imagination. So it ended up being a 2-hour conversation that went late into the night, and I chopped it up into 3 episodes. So if you go to my Twitter, which is at Dr. Bechta, I will plan on tweeting out the accompanying slides that go with this. We referenced them throughout the shows, but hopefully it makes sense without actually being able to see them in podcast form. I also did a video recording of this where Matt and I are very classy and dressed up and totally plenary session, almost level astro plenary session. But so, it was a presentation style. So I will work on editing those and put them on the YouTube channel, which, everyone needs to have a YouTube channel as well. But so if you go to my Twitter account, you'll be able to find copies of the slides, and then we will eventually have a whole sort of visual accompaniment, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyway, here is part 1 of 3 of Matt and I discussing IGRT and immobilization and various other things as our ADHD kicks us into overdrive late in the night. I felt like kind of what you were saying earlier, that I got taught an awful lot about the mechanics or the physics behind IGRT, and I don't remember really it wasn't really baked into the curriculum about what should you do for like when you're a real attending, and you would say that was kind of reflective of your kind of experience as well.
I think so. I think because you kind of learn about the imaging, right? And you learn kind of some of the stuff that you have on this slide, but like I didn't feel like it was taught all that well, like how it comes up in real life when you're an attending and you have to like do this in real life, right? So I like the slide for that reason. It has a lot of stuff on it.
Well, that was the intent because it's reflective of all the activity of my mind. So I think in terms of, Matt, that was a funny joke that you didn't even crack a smile at. So in terms of kind of practicality, so I guess it is July when we're recording this. Wow, it's almost August. Okay, time travels. So I felt like it was good to kind of run through of what a common thing that I experienced with in my hospital. And so Matt, you're now technically unemployed, I think, right? So you're done with WashU.
Yeah.
Start your new gig.
Between jobs.
You're between. That's what they call it. All right. And so this was kind of reflective of the experience that I had at my smaller community department. I don't know how it worked at WashU or how it will work for you, but so I do often get calls from the machine saying we need you to approve a 1.2 centimeter vert shift. And I don't recall really kind of walking through that in residency. But so the question for me was, well, what even does that mean? And there's a coordinate system on the linear accelerators themselves, and it's based on the head first and supine anatomical position. So lateral is left right, vert is anterior post, and long is inferior superior. And so I will get calls. It's easiest on a true beam because I think most of us have access to a true beam or see it often. And so I'll usually get called to the true beam, and I will be told that. And you can see on a true beam if you have ARIA. I haven't. Most of my experiences with the ARIA. I don't know if like the other systems kind of have it, but you can kind of see in a little box in the upper left hand corner of the screen, like what is off and by how much. And that's what they're calling. So, Matt, at my shop, we normally let the therapist have the discretion to adjust with 1 centimeter or less, just kind of a general thing, and each thing is individualized. Do you guys have quote unquote
Well, I wonder, so I don't know how you're going to frame this, but I wonder if we could take a quick step back because if this is going to be for people who are just starting out, I think that we could explain a couple of things to get to this point. So I'm sorry if I'm
Sure.
derailing what you were wanting
You're
to
not derailing me. This was the point. It's off the
Yeah.
cuff, real life, hard
Yeah,
knocks.
yeah. So I think something I always try to explain to patients who are interested, and then also to like medical students and people who are just getting started with this, because I vividly remember seeing this like basically a doctor going to the machine for IGRT setup as a medical student, and I had like no idea what was going on, and I felt like the person that was teaching it to me did kind of an okay job, but I think that all the details get filled in over time, and then you kind of really start to understand what you're looking at. So for me, the way that I describe it to patients actually is that radiation treatments are kind of like a player piano. I don't know if people like know what that
Wow, a player piano, man.
Yeah. So
All
it's
right.
yeah. So like the idea of a player piano is that it plays itself, but so it's an old like machine that basically has like this paper that has these dots in it that cause the keys to depress and play music. And you can imagine that if you shifted the dots over left or right, one way or the other, the whole thing would sound like crap. So the radiation plan that we design does not have any awareness of where the patient is in the room or on the table. And so the entire point of this is making sure that you're setting up the patient to where the machine thinks that that patient is. And I think what I always try to emphasize to patients when I'm talking with them is that these days the plans are so precise and what we call conformal, meaning that we try really hard to only deliver radiation to what needs it, that if you're off even 5 millimeters or 3 millimeters, and if you look at like a ruler, that's a really small distance, you can actually really impact the outcomes because the plan is not being delivered the way that you designed it. There are other things that I saw in your upcoming slides that are important for that comment, but what you're showing here is really just getting the person where you think that they are. So what you were describing is I have ARIA too. I've actually used Mosaic. I use that in training. But both of them, essentially what they do is they take a picture of the image that's like in the ideal that it's supposed to be. And I think what we're going to probably talk about is that comes from the CT simulation. And then they try to match it to what the patient looks like today. I don't know if you feel like I left stuff out of that, but so when you're talking about approving a shift, what that means is that they set the patient up on the table, they took the image of the image guided radiation, and then they needed to shift the patient 1.2 centimeters in whatever direction to make it match, what it was at the time of planning. To me, that's kind of at its most basic. There's kind of a lot in there that I glossed over that's important. So it could be even still that medical students or early residents don't understand some of that. Because we didn't really talk about sim or anything either, right? So
Well, it might be, yeah. So this particular deck was meant more for first year attendings and to do over the summer because I just know that.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So that was actually perfect. Thank you for doing my own slide better than I did. That was beautiful. Yeah, no, because I feel like that's what it was. It's like really hard just in the apprenticeship model of Radon compared to the other. Or sorry, I'm doing. We're rebranding it. It's radiation medicine, so RadMed, and just a thing now. We're making that happen. So in RadMed, like this is really hard to teach because I think somewhere along the way, talking to the people who trained and worked, in the late 80s and throughout the 90s and stuff, there was much more resident autonomy that was allowed. And then that kind of just got slowly, like in the litigious society that is America and all these things, like that got chipped back. And I don't know if anyone listening has the chance to go talk to a radiation oncologist who trained and practiced in like the early 90s and hear what they were allowed to do compared to like what we were allowed to do, it is night and day. And so I don't think we've done a good job of finding a way to give the experiential like learning part of this. There's a few pieces that it's just really hard. And I think like you could teach the mechanics of this, you can see the end product, but finding a way to work the residents into doing this is just, I don't know. I'm sure a program out there has figured it out, but I think most of us probably, I don't know.
I was actually going to say that because I feel like, so people say that like they do a really good job of teaching this. That was not my experience. I felt like that it was really easy to be left out of this as a resident.
Yeah.
When I was teaching residents, it was really challenging because the reality is that this happens. If it happens in real time, like for SBRT, which we'll probably talk about at some point,
Yeah.
that's a little easier. But a lot of times you kind of do this at the end of the day, or you might do it at lunch or even early in the morning before the day starts. And so it was just really kind of challenging to do that. There is a system in ARIA where residents can go and like do this, and then you can see that they did it.
What?
Yeah. You can basically have a thing in ARIA where they can like quote review it. They
What?
can't approve it because it can't be used for billing, so they can't approve it, but they can like review it. And
I
then
live in ARIA, and okay, well,
yeah.
all right.
Well, you probably don't have like a resident account, like they have like
No,
different
no.
permissions, and so you can see that they reviewed it, but you can't see what they did. The other thing that was really hard, honestly, is that if you asked me how many times I declined an image or like, I don't know what the word is, rejected, I guess.
Rejected, yeah.
It's a super low percentage. It's got to be less than 2%. I mean, it's like the therapists where I worked were generally very good, and they have so many tools now to set people up well that like it was just very unlikely that I was like rejecting the images. And also they call you, right? So like if there is a problem, they'll often call and then you kind of talk about it before. So I found this really challenging to like incorporate residents into this workflow. Maybe it was me because I was always behind on approving them. I was always like approving them at the last minute before they were like due and all this stuff, and it was or like at the end of the day, that kind of thing. I don't know.
No, I think you just blew my mind. I thought I fancy myself pretty good with ARIA, but I guess I still, as always, I got a lot to learn. But yeah, I don't know. And the whole concept of offline review is very interesting, where it's already been done. Like that ship has sailed, so it's helpful if it's like a one-off sort of kind of misalignment. Then it's kind of rejecting the image is just saying like, okay, yeah, I noticed this, but I don't know. It just I think technology evolves so fast with this, where if you just look at like the past 20 years of kind of how things went from adopting early, IMRT in the early 2000s, and then it's kind of switching over to VMAT to where we are now. I think we're having a hard time. It's great. I'm glad, it's good to have this problem where it's like, oh, wow, the technology is so much better, but like adapting the workflows that we have in place is going to take some time, I think, to optimize. But so I think, the point of this slide was just kind of, for me, reflecting on, phone calls that I got in the beginning and not being super familiar with it. Cause again, I do think they teach the fundamentals, like the physics of it, like the actual the tech specs of it, great. But then it's the implementation of that knowledge is kind of where the gap is. And so for me, and I don't know what your opinion is, I always find like if you go to the machine and they're like, wow, he's 2 centimeters off, and yeah, it looks fine now. Or sometimes like you'll exceed what people don't realize, or what residents don't realize, is there's a tolerance to the shift. So like if you have more than, I think it's like 3 degrees of rotation on a 6 degree of freedom couch, like the TrueBeam can't do that. So yeah, you think you can go to the machine and you can shift it as much as you need to make it work. But if your setup is so off like that, I think at least rotationally, you just can't, like, you can't make a shift in that direction. So I like to reset the patient, meaning I say, get the patient off the table, kind of, just breathe for a second and then put the patient back on the table and reset up. That for me works 90% of the time. I don't know if you have any tricks like that.
Yeah, no, it does. It does a lot. And actually, one thing that's probably worth saying is I think that there are times where you might have to, if you're someone who reads the room, like you might have to power through some frustrated therapists because remember that like, generally everything runs very smoothly and is very safe. But like, if you ask them to get the patient off the table and then get back on, it like kind of throws off their flow. Right. And so sometimes that, makes people frustrated. And I always found like it was like a balance. Like you want to, if you don't want to do that for 1 millimeter, because it's probably not clinically relevant, but if you're shifting 1.5 centimeters or things just aren't lining up, you gotta do what's right.
I always say it's a long run for a short slide.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's just, and no, I totally agree. So I deal with that a couple different ways. Is one, I like to call it a leapfrog. So I look at the schedule and say, like, so it's easiest with a prostate patient. So if a prostate patient comes in and they've got a really full rectum or really empty bladder, I just ask the therapist, and I obviously did not coin the term leapfrog. Please, someone tell me that I'm not the only planet or person on this planet who says that. But so I say, like, let's leapfrog them. And so I'll have the patient get down off the table. We'll have them go get a drink, and then we'll treat like the next patient. So then you're kind of splitting the difference between increasing accuracy, but not frustrating, the whole work and throw the whole workflow off for the day. But this is bad. I know you and I talk about this in other contexts all the time. This is why I love fractionation and why I love photons, because errors average out. So you can build into your plan, if you have a fuzzy or sort of PTV, like if your setup isn't great, photons are much more forgiving than if you're one of these, crazy people who do a single fraction lung SBRT. Obviously, that's not right. Yeah, that is you. That is you. So this is like, in essence, why I love fractionation, is that I know that, and this is kind of lost in the choosing wisely and all these conversations we have around it, is that, I know that we live in the real world, and that, the plan you see in a proven eclipse might be perfect, but it's a simulation. Like, it's Monte Carlo simulation. That's not what actually is going to happen in real life. And so I just feel like I need to write a book of my folksy sayings, but like, I really just love to say the best laid plans of mice and men, and that's what this is that fractionate. So if your setup isn't great and it's not like, it's going to be much more okay. So
yeah. So I think for this slide, what's this is like a really informative slide. There's kind of a lot here.
It's meant for somebody to like download and look at on their own.
Yeah, and I think what's cool is, like, so if you look at like number 3, 4, and like number 3 and 4 on your list, that's like a safety culture thing that's built in. Like, I think the getting called for a big shift can be probably in some other context. We'll talk about interruptions for clinic and how it makes it challenging to be efficient throughout the day. But it's you kind of want that, because they're very uncommon, right? So something's going on where you should go look at it, and it quickly becomes. I really like that you put scope of practice for therapists, because it comes like, that falls outside their scope. They're not really trained to problem solve when people are not setting up the way that they're supposed to be. And this is actually more common than people think. Like in the abdomen, treating a small target in the abdomen, the lungs can be a big challenge. So those are times that I'll get called, and then, like you said, prostate filling, like bladder and rectal filling, is like probably the number one reason. So
I'm very rigid. I have like a literal printout, and I know this is shocking to everyone who knows me, is that I'm very like, I literally ask the patients to urinate 1 hour beforehand. I ask them to drink 24 ounces of water in 15 minutes to finish those 24 ounces of water 45 minutes before treatment. Do not urinate in between, and then go from there. Now, obviously, each person is different, and 24 ounces might be an awfully lot for somebody to chug in 15 minutes. Conversely, I've literally just watched guys grab it and slam it in 10 seconds. Yeah. It's very impressive. So you have to kind of adapt to that. But whatever it ends up being, I give very kind of strict instructions up front at SIM. Whatever that person is end up able to do, you just kind of make sure that whatever they did, you can recapitulate that. And usually, for me, it's that first week in a prostate treatment in particular, it's feeling people out. So it's that when a prostate patient starts on treatment for the first time, those first week or so could be, the therapist will call me a little bit more, and we'll get to know the patient, and the patient will get to know their body. Because really, when people forget, it's funny, like we'll go in and do these OTBs or be like asking about bowel and bladder movements. Before all this, nobody's sitting there going like, well, I guess I am urinating like 8 times a day, or I guess my bowel movements are a little bit more formed. That's not something that we think about normally. And then, the other thing is when you ask somebody, because this kind of all ties into bowel and bladder habits and kind of side effects. It's just when somebody gives you an answer like that, you got to make sure that you ask what their normal is. So if somebody is saying they're getting up to urinate 4 times a night on radiation treatment, and you're like, oh wow, I really got to do something about this, but they've been getting up 4 times a night for the past 20 years. That's very different than before. So it's kind of a sidebar, but like that's so yeah, I mean, really,
no change through treatment. Right.
Yeah.
They're going to get like more irritated. And one thing that I popped out at me for this too is you have the coordinates there with like the positive and negative. I will just admit that I really, really struggle with communicating which direction a patient
Oh,
needs to move. And so
same.
what I say is I'll go to the machine and I'll say things like move the tumor up or move the tumor down, because everyone gets that, right? Like the key is you don't want to going the wrong way is like super common, right? So
Right.
so like so when I go to the machine, I just make it pretty straightforward, and I just say like let's move the patient or the tumor this direction, and then
Yeah.
and actually Varian has some really good tools I think for at the machine, which are hard to show, I think, because it's hard to like screenshot those screens. But they have some nice user interfaces. Some of them user interfaces that make it pretty easy to understand like what's happening at the time of imaging, which is good.
The way I handle that is I say move the head towards the linac. That's so very, but very, very technical.
So the other thing that's crazy, I just want to say this because it's probably not relevant at all to this talk, but I think that so more and more people are doing these simulation free planning. Have you seen this at all?
What?
You can plan off the diagnostic CT scan.
Oh, I heard about this.
Yeah.
I almost had it. Well, I haven't done it that I recall. I've done other things, but not that. I don't think.
So I think they submitted our experience, the WashU experience, so it should be out somewhat soon. I was a heavy user of this because I had people coming from really far away, and it was just like if you can tell them that you can just do all the planning and then they come and you consent them and treat, they're like, it's basically like a clinical setup on steroids. But
Really like that.
But one thing that was a nightmare was treating extremities because we had multiple near misses or things where we canceled at the last minute because if you put the person in the system head first versus feet first, that's a huge problem. So I like that you have the head first and supine as kind of the thing here, because I think people should pay special attention to when you don't have the patient in that position. I treat extremities, so anything that's like in the knee or below, they need to be feet first. Essentially, and that's just like a huge it's ripe for error, right? So it's just worth paying attention to. And then everything gets turned around. So it's good for the whole team to kind of be on the same page of the orientation of the patient and where they are on the table. Supine would probably be the other big one, right? It's like,
yeah. I mean, that's a great, I've definitely
prone is what I meant to say. Sorry.
Yeah. And that, at least you can see it is harder. And I get super paranoid whenever I have to do feet first setups because it's just not the default. And then I'm like really paranoid that, because the default is supine head first, supine, like that is. And I really hate breaking routine because like you break routine and that's where errors happen. And so I guess along those lines, we're really just going to go stream of consciousness, hot takes. If you have a GE simulator, and I don't know if you've seen this, but so like, especially when I'm doing the arthritis treatments in the knees, and you've probably seen this with, any of your extremity sarcomas. If you have a GE simulator and maybe on the other ones, some of those, the way it automatically removes the couch, like if you go to MD Advanced, like this is on a GE, I can't remember the name of the software, but when you are going to set up, so I set ISO at the time of sim. So if you go into MD Advanced, whatever it is, to set the ISO, if you have an extremity and there's not like a big body contour, the software cannot tell like what is couch and what is body. And if you don't uncheck like the smoothing stuff and the filled cavities, it will remove like a leg. So I don't know if you've encountered that in your software.
No, I have not. Yeah, so I don't usually get that deep into like CT scanner software usually.
You don't sit there and play in the CT simulator and go into the GE software and shake your fist at the software.
One thing you brushed over there that we talked about this on, I think, the mock oral episode, right? We talked about setting ISO and sim.
Yeah.
That's one other thing that I guess is sort of between the lines of what you've written down here. If a lot of clinics don't set ISO at sim. And which is not unreasonable. I think, it's fine. So what they do is they set instead what's called a CT origin, which is your 0 point. And then there's a shift that's built in. And a lot of the clinics I worked in, the shifts were expected. So I think if that's happening for every patient, it's perfectly fine. And they won't call you for that. That's when they get to sort of 0 and then they shift from there. But that's another way to kind of, it would be like an additional step in your list there before they got to, number 2.
Well, and so for the audio only listeners, there's I will tweet this out, and so but like that, and that's the good point is something that I have noticed, and so what has been happening, because it is now July, is that people are starting their jobs, it's really easy to get like a really narrow point of view because I feel like a lot of our residency institutions, the faculty have like been there forever, and so there's not an easy. They don't. It's other ways to do these things are not communicated just because they're not known. And like when we did it was exactly in that mock oral thing. Like from where I train and work and kind of the people I work around, setting ISO, it seems very common. I reviewed papers for PRO and stuff where that was like doing the kind of the ISO lists or whatever. Like there's various ways to index the table and do those sorts of things. And just, there's a lot of ways to do it. And it's kind of adapting to whatever your clinic workflow is. Because really it's all artificial. It came, and hopefully, we'll do a history of medicine stuff. Like there's a reason it's ISO and all these things in a simulator. And that was born, 30 years ago, they were doing that. But we'll go on to the next one.
Yeah.
So on this other sort of thing. So these are images or words that I heard tossed about a lot. And I do think that they were sort of studied on, but just offline review is you are looking at the images that were done. So the images were taken before treatment. The therapist did what they needed to do. The treatment happened, and you are looking at them after. So offline is after the treatment has happened for the day. You got to generally do them before the next one. And then online review is generally what we do for SBRT. So when you get called to the machine and you kind of make shifts in real time before the treatment happens. And it's very interesting to me. It varies by state, institution to institution about what the laws are, or not the laws, but like what the regulations are around that. So wherever I've been, the doc and the physicist always go to each SBRT. But I don't know, Matt, what it was like in WashU or in your
place. This was like hilarious. This is like the bane of people's existence. So if it was SBRT, true SBRT, the physician would go to every treatment. Physicist would go to the first treatment. Sometimes they'd come to all of them. There were special exceptions and things like that, but that was kind of the standard. And then we would have these like high dose, not SBRT treatments.
Yes, and every place has called them something else. Yeah.
So did you have a threshold of where you'd have to have a physician go to the machine, or?
So at Yale, what did they do? I blank on what they called it. For me, like, because I kind of run the show in like my little department, I basically decide when I'm going to come. So I go for every SBRT and every SRS. I personally go to every like external beam APBI, but we don't bill it as SBRT, but I treat it as SBRT, just the nature of it. But yeah, so there's no threshold other than I feel like it's necessary.
So like, yeah, so I guess for like new attendings, so like when you're doing true SBRT and it's billed as SBRT or SRS, you have to be at the machine. That's like not a choice. It's a legal thing, and it goes in.
Well, it's a CMS thing, which is different than a legal thing. But
it is. Someone makes a rule that you have to
rule. There you go. It's a regulatory rule. It's not a law.
Yeah. So that's sort of built in, and I'm pretty sure every clinic would require that. So that's like not going to be an issue. But we're pushing into these spaces where it's more and more dose per day, and it might not be billed as SBRT, so you're not required to be there, but you can see how offline review might not be as adequate for that. So for us, I can't remember what we landed on as a dose. Maybe it was 5 gray or 6. But so for my practice, like when I started doing the 5 fraction SBRT, and this could be a whole other thing. We did not bill this as SBRT. I always billed it as IMRT. And there's reasons for that that just had to do with the workflows in the department. I know that Cleveland Clinic bills it as SBRT. It's very reasonable because I wanted to be there for each treatment. So what I always wanted that we never really had was an independent order for physician supervision, right? And so like I don't understand why it's tied to the treatment type. I feel like it should just be.
So that's an institution thing. So I actually redid my CT Sim order sheet to include that.
Like where physician supervision is required at treatment, right?
Yeah. But because I'm like, I get to call the shot. So it's much easier than like being in the Borg of an institution so in my department, I decided that was a thing that needed to happen. And so I just go into the ARIA template managers and I add that to my CT Sim order sheet. So because I feel like it's important, but I don't have to cut through red tape to do that. Whereas that would not fly at a giant institution.
Yeah. So that's kind of that's sort of what we did. I don't remember the dose that was the threshold. Like physics kind of they had like a rule internally of where they wanted physician supervision for certain, like 8x1, you had to review it. You actually could do it remotely, but you had to do it in real time. That kind of a
Wait,
thing.
you guys treated 8x1 like the physician had to go to the machine, like online review?
No, it had to be approved at the time of treatment. So you could do it from your desk or whatever, but like
Oh, that's it. So that's a weird hybrid. Okay.
So
That
oh yeah. So we can tweet these papers out too. So we actually got like really weird because we had special systems set up to do remote like coverage of SBRT when you were in the building. This was a COVID thing because we wanted to like reduce the number of people like at the machine. So we had like Microsoft Teams where you could like log in and see the screen and like scroll through.
I've seen people do it with Citrix and stuff.
Yeah. So we did that too. But I think I don't know. I don't want to. I guess I don't like remember the exact rule because it was so squishy, and there were many discussions about it. But basically, over a certain dose per day, or they kind of wanted physician supervision. I think, for example, if you're doing a 2D or 3D planned 8x1, there's no reason you can't review that from your desk. You don't have to be at the machine for it. I would often go to the machine because I like getting steps in, or like I just like going to the machine and talking to the therapist.
That seems like something you would do, yeah.
Yeah, so I would go there, but you could totally do it remotely. The one thing that I always was taught though is never offline review when you're like listed as being on vacation. That's actually like a really good way to get in trouble. Yeah, that was like, it was weird. That was something that was taught to me multiple times by different people when I was a resident, and I was like, okay, I won't. And that was kind of.
All right, we'll talk offline about where that was born, but
yeah, I know. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But that was something that was taught to me multiple times without the context, and it was just I think the point is you need to be like listed as working, right? Because you're like working and covering images and things like that.
All right, so that was part 1 of 3 of the IGRT discussion that Matt and I had. I will have the first 2 slides available on my Twitter account. I think we just stuck to the first slide for this part, but and then I will be releasing the other 2 as I finish them. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Basement. You can claim CME for this and any other episode by following the link in the show notes. You can find me on Twitter with @DrBekta or visit www.bektamd.com. If you like this content, please let us know by rating and following us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If there's any topic you want to hear covered, or if you want to come on and talk about something yourself, reach out and let us know, and we will make it happen. Otherwise, talk to you next time.